All right. Thank you everyone for joining our session today on cybersecurity best practices. Our speakers today are Dr. Williams, who is the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Complex at Norfolk State University, and JB Smith, who is a Senior Risk Control Consultant here at HAI Group. The session today will focus on the most important steps affordable housing organizations can take to address emerging cybersecurity threats. As a reminder, please submit any questions you have, and we will do our best to answer these throughout the session. So I will go on mute and let you both take it from here.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Williams, good afternoon. I guess I would like to start this little session off with asking you, Dr. Williams, what makes a housing provider a good target for a cybersecurity criminal?
Well, generally, the profile of the client of a housing provider is probably someone who's less likely to invest in measures to prevent identity theft. So if they can hack into a provider systems, then they can be able to obtain data that would be available to them for an extended amount of time, right? Because the clientele is not someone like me who is checking my bank account, 3 or 4 times a day, have things in place to make sure that if something hits my credit, then, I get a notification. Though, the profile of that person, they just don't do that. And so it makes them, more at risk to getting a delayed notification that something has happened. And it doesn't have anything to do with no credit, great credit, or not so good credit. It's just the ability to be able to obtain an identity and how long they have access to a particular identity. So if they can create an identity with a person's information, then they can create an identity and ruin someone's credit in a short amount of time. So if the profile of the person who's the client is not actively, monitoring their identity or their social platforms, digital profile online, then, it makes them more vulnerable to attacks.
And would it be fair to say these types of attacks on housing providers, people may get into these systems and take information and maybe not act upon it right away? Is that possible?
Sure, it all depends on the payload. So the difference is that the hacker knows what, they have a script in their mind of what they're trying to do. So they might just be trying to acquire all the information, see if anybody screams, quickly. And if nothing happens, then they might just sell it on the dark web. And a lot of hackers will do that. And then individuals will secure whatever information they can and create, identities, duplicate identities or the such. Or they may, want the information for themselves and try and, a lot of ways to just, do different things. It all just depends on what it is they want to do. But most of the time, what they are securing is personable PII, personable identifiable information, which they can then use in another place to replicate someone online.
Okay. So, and I know that you and I have spoken at length about cybersecurity in general. What is this concept of knowing the value of your digital information?
Well, so the thing is, with digital information, it doesn't necessarily show up on a company's balance sheet. So everybody knows how much cash I have. I know what my liabilities are, so I can calculate my net worth. But if I have data stored on computers, or if I have transaction history, mergers, acquisitions, bankruptcy filings, data sales, all of that information, when taken in pieces and put together, can contribute to knowing how much a company is valued. And then that data, which could be open publicly, when put together correctly, could shed some light on that. So companies should look at how they interface and how their users interface with their data, where it's stored. And if you lost access to all of that data, what would you really be able to do as a company? Now, a lot of people can understand that. So if I'm not able to function as a company, then I'm losing so many dollars per day. So you can equate that to the data that's stored on the servers or what have you, but you have to think about it in different ways. So when you're trying to know the value of your digital information, let's just say that you had a water leak or something, not even a hack, but a water leak, and your server was compromised and your server went offline. And so now you're not able to do your normal daily work. Is that costing you money? How much does it cost if you're off 5-10 days? You know, the amount of time it takes to replace that server. So imagine then if you're hacked and it's compromised and you don't have access, but it's working, then that it has the same effect. So that's why you need to know what your value is. Now you could use, there are a couple of approaches in cyber terms that they suggest you use. You could use a market-based approach, or you could also use what they call the approach to cost-based method. That's where you set a minimum bar for the value of the data. But with that cost-based method, it doesn't take into account the future benefit of the data. So how the data might be used later to generate money. It really is, what it's doing is taking a snapshot today, what it cost me to store it in a different place or like that. And it's only one variable that's used to monetize that particular data. So collection, analysis costs, for example, can often be greater than the cost of the storage. And as such, not accounting for all of those variables often results in underestimating the intrinsic value of a company's data. There's also another approach that has been used, I believe it's called a cash flow based approach, and that's where the data of the company is converted directly to free cash flow and can provide some insight to what your data is worth. But I think with all of the approaches, the general idea is if I don't have access to the data, meaning that I can't operate, then what does that cost to me? Because it could be the server, the equipment, how much you paid for it, but then all of the data, what you cannot generate business from. So how much does that cost you per day? So it's not just replacing the server, it is your daily cost that you are now not able to generate has value. And when you combine them all together, what is the real value of that digital information?
So it's just important to keep control over that. And you bring up a great point about talking about what is it going to cost you. And I think that all of the individuals here in this particular session understand that most of them have employees. So is it important to monitor when you talk about protecting your data, is it important to monitor employee computer usage within the company network, and why?
So, people might not want to hear this, but what I will say, it is very important to monitor the traffic that travels your company network, right? which includes how your users interface with different systems on your network. A user could inadvertently introduce or share malicious software. Not intentional, but it could happen. So as an IT professional, it's important to block, certain websites, could often block certain types of traffic to reduce threat from propagating through your company's system. And at all times, monitoring just won't help, prevent everything. So monitoring is one strategy that you would incorporate among many, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen. So I can recall a situation where I was responsible for a federal agency's networks, right? That was my job. I was an IT division officer. And my Exchange servers were compromised by the I Love You virus. So I don't know how many of you remember the I Love You virus, but basically it was an email that was delivered to a particular user. And once the user clicked on the email to read it, it then propagated. It sent the email to everybody in your contact list. So if you're thinking of an Exchange server and a company's database, that's everybody's email address in there. So once one user clicked on it, it sent the email out to everybody. And for me, that was probably about 700 users. So imagine 50 users clicking that, how much email traffic was generated. So not only was it straining my Exchange server in a short amount of time, but that particular virus also attacked all of the images on your computers. So even when we thought we had it under control by bringing the Exchange servers down, we had to restore them from backup, we still then had to go and touch nearly every computer on the base because the damage had already been done once the email propagated and sent to everybody in the contact list. Because then we had to service each computer to make sure that the virus was no longer attached to any type of images stored on the systems of all of the users that were on the base. So that recovery took us like 72 hours, a complete weekend, to get back to some normalcy so that our users could be back in business. And so small businesses, any kind of businesses, have to think about that if something was to happen. And that was introduced by a user. Someone sent them an email and then it just kept going and going and going. If you are unable to function for, 3 days, what does that really do to your business? Will you be able to sustain it? What if you're not able to recover? All of those things are a concern. Now, we monitored all of the traffic on the base, every user that was on the base, including some visitors who were on our systems, attached to our systems. We monitor all the traffic. And we stopped a lot of things. And when I say monitor, we had a tool that did the monitoring. And it stopped a lot of known challenges. The situation becomes worse when you don't know the challenges, so they can't be stopped by the tools. We had intrusion detection system and in layers. So outside the firewall and inside the firewall before it actually got to our networks. But yet the I Love You virus still made it through and caused a lot of damage that really shut us down for about 3 days.
So let me ask this question. So I'm a housing provider. I have 3 or 4 people that work within my office to conduct various tasks on their computers. And as you know, there's a big holiday around the corner and we all like to catch those deals. So would it be problematic for me to allow my employees who can't make it off to go on their personal devices or go outside of the office to shop during their lunch period? Is it a problem to allow them to go to Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and those types of sites while working on a company computer?
So, that's really a company's decision. The key is where we currently are, like say here at Norfolk State, while I'm not in the actual office that does the cybersecurity now, I'm more of a responsible for a research lab. So we're looking at developing new tools to detect cyber. But from a practical solution, right? Companies should put in place everything to let their users know that anything they say, do, send across their network is subject to monitoring, meaning that all the data is collected. Now, you can say to me, sure, go on at lunchtime. Go on and go to these websites and do all the shopping that you want to do. But there's nothing preventing them to do that. But there's also nothing preventing your users from going at 10 a.m., 2 a.m., all day long sitting out there, right? Because most companies are not blocking those type of sites and they have some reasonable understanding. I'm not calling it allowance, but some reasonable understanding that every now and then you might just need to jump over and get to a particular site like that. The challenge is they have to determine what is their acceptable level of risk, right? So I could be a very hard-nosed company and say, no, nobody goes to sales sites on my networks at all, right? Because you don't know what you're doing. I don't trust you to know that this is not what you're doing. Plus, it's not business related. I'm providing you access to these resources so that you can do the work I need you to do for me, right? A company could take that position. But then a company could say, well, it's an acceptable level of risk that every now and then, as long as users are not abusing it, that they would be able to visit those sites, do their shopping, and return to doing their work because they're not abusing the privilege. The key is, if that is an acceptable level of risk, are you training your users to recognize things that suggest that they're at reputable sites, right? Do your users know that if you're going to a sales site and you want to insert your credit card information, that you should be looking for a secure server, HTTPS, and a lock? Those things in the browsers are first level indicators that the site is probably okay. If the user reaches a site that says that there's a configuration problem with the server that you're trying to reach and the computer that you're getting to, and it's a notification, but you can bypass it. Do your users bypass it, or do they say, oh, maybe I shouldn't go? If you get a certification configuration error like that, you shouldn't bypass it because it told you there was a problem for a reason. And what that generally means is that there is some update that is required somewhere. Could be the user, could be your browser, could be your computer, somewhere where the protocol is not talking correctly. So the browser displays a message that says, hey, you might want to be careful. Now, a lot of us as users don't read those messages. So we say, okay, I'm careful, and click on through and go on. And then something happens and then we wonder what happened. Well, did you go back to 2 or 3 steps and it told you not to do it and you said, oh, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So then you have to figure out how to fix it. And unfortunately, in a number of organizations that I'm in, I see that happen to more seasoned people, you know, a little bit older than us, who don't read the messages, but click right on through to do what they want to do and then wonder what happened. Because
I've been guilty of that. I have in the past. I've been guilty of not totally 100%. I'm like, oh well, you know, if it still works, it still works. And I think that with the being in a working role using your working computer, just as you stated, we need to be a little more diligent and pay attention to messages with a little more detail and concern. And I think that that's kind of what people need to understand that are listening to us, is that there should be a requirement to really pay attention to those possible red flags that may lead you in a direction that you don't want to go, or perhaps provide that exposure that your organization does not need or is not willing to accept.
Very true. And you have to also think of it as your organization is providing you a resource to do your job. And a lot of times what I need for you to do the job is available and can be used for you to do a lot of things personally. But should you, you're at work to do that work. Most of us have cell phones, and I would imagine that these providers are not in classified environments, then, use your cell phone or what have you to do it. But if you are attaching to a company's wireless network or something like that, your information is still traveling on their networks and will be subject to the monitoring, the detection, all of those things. So I think users have to be conscientious about, what it is that they want to do. But I think business owners have to decide what is the acceptable level of risk. And a lot of times a business owner can't take the very hard-nosed approach, because in a lot of monitoring devices, you can get false positives, right? So let's say, as an example, I think everybody will understand, we don't want people going to, let's say, pornography sites on our networks, right? But I'm located in the state of Virginia. So if I add in a code that says people can't search for virgins for whatever reason, Virginia is going to come up every time. And then that could block my users from being able to do the business that they need to do. So we have to, again, be very proactive, review what it is that the company needs. And then I always say you add a common sense approach to the monitoring, to the analysis, to the data collection, all of that has to happen so that your users can do the work, but also provide training annually so the users will know what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And business owners will often, when you log into their computers, a lot of times we don't read it, but there's a notification that pops up that says that once you click through and enter your password, you are consenting to be monitored every time you log in. So I do believe in monitoring, because a lot of times that is how potential challenges are identified.
So as we're talking about businesses, what kinds of tasks should businesses be engaged in order to prepare for cybersecurity issues?
So, planning, period, right? You need to create baseline images for your computers or your networks and document your infrastructure. And in my experience, the documentation has been one of the main factors that smaller businesses won't have, because it all just depends on who they got to set up their network. I know some small business owners who got networks for dummies
So they
and
did it
read the
themselves?
book, did the networks for dummies, right? Read it, did all of the configuration, and then want to call you in to say, hey, this is not working. Well, you're not going to get everything that you need out of those type of books, right? But you should probably invest in some type of IT solution company who can come and do an assessment, provide a strategy, develop a solution for you and cost it, and then tell you what it's going to take to maintain it. So whenever you're preparing your business for cybersecurity, you always want to consider a defense in-depth strategy. And what that means is that you just have multiple checks across your network where you're going to be checking for certain things that are well known. So you have to consider all the paths to get data into your network. Email is one. If you have the ability to text into your network, going to the website is another way to bring back information. Because most websites have cookies, right? Where they store information on your computer. Do you allow them to store that information? Or do you say no? Now, because the cookies were storing malware, all of the companies now have to disclose to you that I am storing cookies on your computer. And you have to say yes or no. And I'm sure right now that we all been presented with that question. And there are several of us who don't really know what that means. But what you have just said is, yes, I agree to allow you to store some data about me on my computer so that when you come back to my website, I will remember you. So I can say, hey, JB, what are you looking for today? But think about the information could also have malware in it. Now, most of the companies that you visit on the website are going to be reputable and they're not going to store that type of information. But what if you just happen upon one company that has some bad malware stored in a session cookie? And that's all it would take is one, right? That would be the challenge, that you now introduce some malware into your company's network, not at home. And now your IT, the owners, whomever, have to figure out how to prevent that malware from propagating throughout the systems and or cleaning your computer so that it can be used. And then they have to go back and revisit, acceptable levels of risk.
You brought up when you talked a few seconds ago with relation to the individual, having someone, if you're not going to do it yourself, come into your organization or participate in your organization. So as we utilize internal and external expertise, what kinds of credentials should we seek for those entities or individuals that would be considered for our cybersecurity support?
So the thing that you are wanting to understand is, what is the threat intelligence, right? And the threat intelligence is the knowledge that allows you to prevent or mitigate any type of attack that may come towards you, right? Though that intelligence or those attacks could be rooted in data or not. And but it could be information like, who is attacking you, right? What is their motivation and what are their capabilities? And then what kind of indicators of compromise to look for in your systems. So when you're looking for internal and external expertise, those are the things that you're looking for. Who in your company internally would know how to use that to make informed decisions about your security? So one of the real challenges is that, there's a serious shortage of skilled professionals, right? But when you're looking internally, you want to look for a couple of things. The best solutions are going to use machine learning to automate data collection and processing, and then integrate that information with your existing solutions, right? Like taking unstructured data from many sources and then connecting the dots to provide indicators of compromise, right? And then being able to pull back the tactics, technique, procedures that they use to get into your system. So first of all, you're going to want people who know your company. So they're going to be your planners and your directors. They know your business well and can determine what you have that would be of interest to others, right? That's very important. Then you need a person who knows how to collect the data, which could be list of internet providers. It could be malicious IP addresses. So do you have anyone who likes to go out and, is connected on the dark web or has a fancy for that type of stuff to know what are malicious IP addresses, domains, and even file hashes? Now, a file hash is used, let's say you're at work and you need to download something. So you go to a website, you download it, and you assume that it is the correct file, right? What if that site has been hacked? I don't know if you remember, but that happened to Microsoft one time. Somebody had completely cloned their update server. So you had all these people with Microsoft Office products and Windows that were updating their systems and going to a cloned update server that they didn't know anything about and downloading bad files. So a hash process would allow you to know what the hash should be. You would hash it once you download it, and you would get the right numbers to generate from the hash, and then you can match them. So that is a technique that cyber professionals will use. Because those things can indicate vulnerability information. Now, what about personally identifiable information of customers, right? Raw code from paste sites or text from news sources and social media. So there's a lot of disinformation that's just, flying all around social media right now. And some of it could be embedded to attack users. And so what happens is, once you have someone who can collect all of that stuff, then you need someone who can process that. And I, again, believe that should be automated, even for small organizations, because the data collected could be on the order of millions of log events, because that's really where it is, right? It's data that is stored in the logs. And do you regularly review the logs, or do you have an automated process to review those logs? It's just too much for human analysts to process efficiently. So that's why you should have an experienced analyst who has an automated process that will flag them, give a notification that says something is wrong. And then the human can go back and look at the flags and try to make sense of the information.
So let me ask this question real quick. I don't mean to interrupt, but I do mean to interrupt, but I apologize. So in short, is there a particular or a short method of credentialing or credentials that one should possess or an entity should possess that would kind of stand out right in front when you're going through this process, as many of our insureds that are on this call probably look at, and they have to decide, do I hire JB's company or do I hire Dr. Williams' company? And what separates the two of them to say that JB's company is better than Dr. Williams' company? Is there a credential, some type of certification when you're looking to procure these types of services?
So that's interesting. What I will say that generally speaking, the credentials that people use would be the Security Plus, right? It is the first credential. So I'm an educator, right? So I teach people how to do cybersecurity, and I don't give them a certification. I give them a degree, and I teach them how to think about process and how to be able to extrapolate that process to other processes, right? However, certifications have been developed that says this person knows something at a particular time based on a set of standards. So it has some value, but you should not believe that somebody with a Security Plus is all knowing. So I don't want to give out the message that if you just go get one or two people and they have Security Plus certifications, then they're going to know everything. They'll know quite a bit. But the experience of having to do these things will also be very valuable in how they are able to support your networks, right? So I would say if I were having to identify something, then I would say probably a Security Plus, probably a Network Plus, because you're going to learn how the different networks interface with one another. The Security Plus adds that security piece on top of that. And then there are tons and tons of certifications that people can have, on up to a CISSP, right? A Certified Information System Security person, right? And to even get that, you have to have been working in the field 5 to 7 years before you can even apply for it. And it covers a number of domains where Security Plus would be a domain, Network Plus would be a domain, but to be a certified information security personnel, you would have to have experience and tested over several domains. So depending on the person that you're looking for, so if you need somebody who's going to plan and be able to provide documentation and feedback that to like a C-suite level of persons, then you need someone who can translate, someone higher level, right? So maybe that certified CISSP person. But the people who are actually doing the work, they would be, you know, your Security Plus, or there's a site, there's a ton of them. There's a cybersecurity cert, you know, CompTIA offers a lot of securities, but then also there's AWS, they offer certs, SANS offers certs.
Oh, sounds like it's a lot out there.
Yeah, a lot of certifications out there.
Okay. Well, thinking about, you know, trying to go back to just getting on your network and operating your network. And I hear this term thrown around a lot. And I guess some of the people here would love to know or have an explanation of the importance of multi-factor authentication. I think I hear this term a lot thrown around, and I don't know that everyone actually understands the importance of it, or why you should do it, or exactly what it is, if you could help us.
Okay, so multi-factor authentication is an electronic authentication method in which a user is granted access to a website or an application only after successfully presenting two or more pieces of evidence to an authentication mechanism, right? So which could be knowledge, it could be possession, or it could be inherent. So let's say, as an example, I use Google Gmail, probably all of you too, right? And so I have turned on two-factor, which is multi-factor, two-factor authentication. And so basically the first factor is I have to enter the correct password. Then if I enter the correct password, it will then say, open up your app and give me the number that was generated in your app. And so that is the possession factor. So what that means is if I'm in India and I don't have my phone, so somebody could have guessed my password, cracked my password, be in India, log into my account with my password. But because I have the second factor on, when it tells me to open up my app and my app is registered to my particular iPhone device, that person in India is not going to have access to that second factor, so they can't get into my Gmail account, right? And what that does, it makes it exponentially harder for someone to compromise or get into your systems, because the hacker then has to have, multiple ways to, they might guess the password. And a lot of us have poorly structured passwords anyway, right? Or they'll use a tool to guess our password. And there are lots of them out there for free that people can download. And they just run root attacks, dictionary attacks across passwords, and they can get in. But having that second factor turned on, means that they can't get past it. They would have to be able to get through both of those factors before they get access. So I strongly encourage multi-factor authentication, and almost every tool app you have right now will allow you to do at least two-factor authentication, and it might be labeled as 2FA. And that exponentially increases the protection of your account because of the possession criteria that's now added to a password or a PIN or a Face ID.
Okay. So now that we've talked about being that person or trying to get into a system and using, multi-factor authentication, whether it's 2 or 10, how for businesses and those that are in this role on the call, how can reviewing and updating your agency's risk management plan support cybersecurity efforts?
Well, so the thing we have to remember is that threats and compromises are revealed every day, many times a day, right? So if you don't review or update your agency risk management plan, let's say your plan is over a year old, then you won't be able to respond to recent compromises.
Okay.
So to give you another example, how many of you have computers and every day it seems like there's an update to your computer? Multiple times a day, there's an update to your computer. Why do you think the companies are releasing updates? That is most likely because they have just learned that a vulnerability in something has been exploited, and so they wanted you to patch it before you can get compromised. That's how fast vulnerabilities, threats, all of those things arrive daily. So if you have a risk management plan and you haven't looked at it, you haven't attempted to execute the plan as defined, then what are you gonna do if something really happens? You don't know if it works. So that's why you have to review it, update it, execute it, by practicing it. To have an idea that if something was to happen, I really do indeed have a recovery plan, a mitigation plan. That means to keep it from propagating, that I have a way to contain it where it is, and that I have a way to get back to business.
And that's that resiliency portion of being able to bounce back after something has happened. So to move on, I know there's another term, and we've come up with a lot of terms. I would say that, and we've even coined this last year as the COVID year, because we've all resorted to a much more electronic way of life. And we've seen in the media how companies have been taken advantage of in this new environment that we are dealing with, and the fact that we do a lot more business, and businesses are required to really pay attention. So this term ransomware, what is ransomware, and why should housing operators take this as a serious threat?
So ransomware is a type of malware that threatens to publish the victim's personal data or perpetually block access to it unless a ransom is paid. It's just that, right? So if we think of a ransom, someone kidnapping someone and say, you got to pay me this amount of money to get this person back, it's the same thing, except it's your data that they have kidnapped. And it's happening every day. It happens to large scale entities. It happens to government agencies. And it also happens to individual users. So the question becomes, if you no longer have access to your data because you're locked out, how will you run your business? The other thing is, if your users' PII, personally identifiable information, is now in the hands of hackers, what protections did you provide to your customers for storing their data? Can they now all sue you because their data was compromised on your data? Or did you put some clauses in place that prevents you from being the provider of their data to an external factor, right? And the thing about it is, if you no longer have access to the data, how will you run your business? How long can you do that? How long can you remain in operation if you have no access to your data? How much does it cost to pay the ransomware? How much is the ransom? Is it more effective to pay the ransom than for you to be denied access to all of your data for multiple days? Now, I can't tell you the answer to that because that's really going to be up to the users. But what I will tell you that there have been a number of large agencies who have paid the ransom because there was a greater cost to the daily loss of business when they didn't have access to the data.
Was it JB Meats? Was one of them?
There are several, and a lot of them are just not published. I mean, especially government agencies who have paid them. And see, the other thing is once you collect, and you probably had this to happen. So once companies are collecting your data on their service, if something happens to the data, if they've been breached or anything, they have to notify you. And you've probably gotten a letter in the mail that says, hey, you know, we had a challenge, but it's been rectified and now your data is fine, blah, blah, blah. But what happened in the time that it was not controlled? So a number of them will offer identity monitoring for you to give you some sense of comfort that you really are protected. They fix the situation, and that if something was to happen, this is what you can do for free of charge. But it happens a lot.
Well, with ransomware, I would figure that, you know, like you said, the ransom, but, you know, from in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, someone can enter into your system, commandeer it, you pay, they say they have given you full control back, but how do you, is there any way to be sure that there is no possibility that someone could come back and say, you know what, we had a good payday here, we didn't charge them that much, we'll wait 6 months and come back again?
See, and that has happened, right? So a lot of times they'll do that, right? So the hacker, the one who's giving you, you know, exhibited the ransomware, will plant something that they can come back into. They put in a backdoor, a way to get back into your system. And usually they do it on a timer so that when you are scanning your systems and looking for any type of malicious activity or all of that, it won't show up immediately, because they'll put it on a timer so that it doesn't show up until they're ready to come back. So once you pay a ransom, again, you've got to come up with a different strategy as to what that means, the acceptable level of risk. You've got to bring in people that make sure that, you know, the doors that are not there, but you're going to have to bring in specific expertise to be able to review your systems. But like I said, you know, hackers get slick and they just, you know, wait and put those timers in. But I will tell you that when agencies have paid the ransom, then they add additional protections, you know, increased firewalls, so all of that. So the backdoor may be embedded in the systems, but then they add additional protection measures to block, you know, people from being able to get in. So then they can't get to the backdoor and execute it again.
So all this getting in systems makes me wonder, you know, are there any specific technologies, practices, or other measures that organizations that are into the affordable and public housing arena can engage in to help reduce delays of cyber incident recovery?
So again, you know, you have to plan what your network is going to look like, and you have to document it. So unfortunately, for a lot of small businesses, that's the first piece that they don't do. So I have been called, we have had students to do internships, you know, they go and, you know, to help the smaller businesses. And the first thing we ask for is, where's your documentation? And they don't have it. So without the documentations, you can't do a good assessment, right? So one of the first practices that I suggest that any company takes is to document your networks and your systems so that you'll have it in case something happens. Then you need to make sure that you are backing up your systems, and you have to determine what you want to back up and the frequency. Are you going to do incremental backups, you know, daily, and do full backups, you know, weekly? And what that means is that an incremental backup is only going to include what changed from yesterday to today, right? So if you have something that takes you all the way down and you have to go back a week to a full backup, then you will have lost the incremental data, incremental backups, that would have happened in between the full backup. But the point is to be aware of the plan. So that should be documented. Then you need to train your users. Your users should know what is and is not acceptable, what they should and should not do on your company networks. And that they should have to attest to that in some way annually, right? So some kind of training that comes around every year that says, yes, I understand. You need to employ a defense in-depth strategy. You need to include multiple checkpoints, firewalls, intrusion detection software inside, outside of firewalls. You need to determine, you'll have peripheral firewalls before information comes into your network. Then you need to determine that you want the firewalls on the individual systems. But you really need to work with a professional, IT professional, cybersecurity professional that helps you develop that whole systematic approach so that you will understand where your points of entry are and how they're secured, that your firewall software is being updated as frequently as it needs to be, whether or not you're going to include antivirus software on your users' computers that can help you. And then if you are, how does those patches get updated timely? So are you going to include update sessions that run overnight for a particular software that pushes to all of the computers in your network? There are lots of pieces to consider, but all of that should be documented in what we would call a standard, an SOP, right? Operation plan. And once those things are in place, do you execute it? Are you backing up? Have you tested your recovery process? Because you can back up everything, but if you don't know how to restore it, then have you really helped yourself? Not really, right?
You brought up a good point that I experienced in one of the crisis classes that I've taken. And they brought up a scenario where there was a catastrophic event, took all the technology down. They had to move to an offsite location and then bring everything back up online. But the one piece that the critical piece that they were missing was the software startup access to be able to initiate and initialize the software programs that they used within their business on new equipment at a different location in order to pull in the backup data. And I think a lot of people, in talking with them, a lot of companies miss that part. They have their information ready to be backed up, but they really, like you said, they haven't gone through a full exercise of what do you do if, and I know for the region that I service a lot, there's a weather exposure, not even talking about cyber, just if their technology goes down and they've got to buy new hardware, new machines, how do you come back up and running again? You have your data stored in an offsite location that may not have been compromised, but when it comes to bringing all that stuff back into your house so you can do business again, you don't have the version that you were working with prior to the catastrophic event.
That's correct. So the redundancy in place, and I didn't mention that, but that is a very important piece, right? Because exactly that. So if something goes down, what are the process? What is the process to actually restore everything back to where it was at a particular point in time? If you have never attempted to do that, you are vulnerable because it just might not work as easy as you believe it to be. And that is why you have to practice it to know that I will be able to restore our data to the place where we were working.
So I guess I would ask, and I kind of introduced it into the conversation about, having your data stored outside, or, we talked earlier about servers. Can you explain the basic ins and outs of, I think the term is cloud computing model, as it relates to local and virtual types of networks, for those that may be pushing and pulling on whether they should keep their data on servers locally, or should it be stored, as I guess everyone says, the cloud in some aspect, and kind of touch on that.
Sure. So there are several cloud deployment models. You could have or subscribe to what's called a public cloud. And a public cloud environment is going to be owned by an outsourced cloud provider. And it's going to be accessible to many businesses through an internet or pay-per-use model. So going back to the example that I use, where many of us use Gmail, right? If we think about our Gmail account, Gmail, wherever you log in, your Gmail is always available. So it is replicated in a lot of places in the cloud, public cloud. And all you need is an app or web browser or something to be able to get to it. And because Google has implemented redundancy, then your whole mailbox is here, could be in London, could be in China as well. So any data place that goes down, it's just going to reroute you to another place. And that's why it makes it always available. So public clouds are best used for businesses who want to save money on IT operational costs, because the outsourced provider is going to be the one who provides all of those services. So you're just paying not to have to manage it, right? Because the cloud provider is going to be responsible for the creation and maintenance of your resources. So you don't have to worry about if your data goes down, because that provider is going to make sure that it's always available. And if they don't, then they're going to provide some type of restitution to you so that you'll be able to stay in business. So it's good for small and medium-sized businesses with, limited resources and requiring quick and easy platform to deploy IT resources. So it might be the thing for the provider. So it's easily scalable. You don't have geographic restrictions. If you're thinking like Google, Gmail, and there are many providers, not just Google, but I'm just saying, no geographical restrictions. You can go anywhere, and as long as you have a browser, you can log into your Gmail account. You don't have to be any particular place. It's cost effective, it's reliable, highly reliable, and it's easy to manage. Now, a con of a public cloud is that it's not really the safest option for sensitive data. And let's say that you have some sensitive data, but it now is on the Google Cloud, and you have to be concerned whether or not your sensitive data gets leaked, because it's replicated so many times. You don't have control over where your sensitive data is. So that's one of the concerns. So it is the benefit of a public cloud also turns out to be, the things that's not so great for the sensitive data. Now you could consider a private cloud. And so this is where the infrastructure is owned by a single business, and it offers a more controlled environment in which to access IT resources, and it is generally centralized within the business. So it can be externally hosted or it can be managed in-house, but it can be very expensive. And for larger businesses, it can offer a higher level of security and more autonomy to customize the storage, networking, computing components to suit your IT requirements. So some of the advantages of a private cloud is that you do have the improved level of security because you're managing it. You're not outsourcing it to anyone. And so there you do have greater control over the server. It's not going to be replicated in a lot of places, and therefore you can customize it. But because you have that greater level of security, then it's harder to access from remote locations, right? So that's when sometimes you might have to use a VPN, and using the VPN, then you're actually logging back through the internet to your company's network. But the configuration of a private cloud is going to require IT expertise in-house, right? So that's the pro and con. Then you could have what's called a hybrid cloud. That's when you have your public and private deployment models. It becomes a good option to kind of mitigate and create a tailored solution that meets your specific business requirements. So again, with the hybrid cloud, it's going to be highly flexible, scalable, it'll be cost effective, and you'll have enhanced security. But again, the communication at the network level can become conflicted as it's used in both private and public clouds, right? Because they really operate differently. So when you hybrid them, it just makes it, you can have a lot of conflicts, a lot of false positives with servers that are not really configured because, depending on where you're coming from, if you come through a VPN, you might let you in. If you're not, then, should I let you in, even though you have your credentials? So again, that becomes a little tricky, and you'd still need some IT expertise for that. Now, within those deployment models, there are services, cloud services that are available, and you might have heard of them. Infrastructure as a service. That's where you can get virtual servers, network operating systems, data storage drives, all in the cloud. So you don't have to purchase those things locally. You kind of just rent them, and people configure these things in the internet, and then they do what you need them to do. And there is ideal for small and medium-sized organizations looking for a cost-effective way to support business growth, right? It's outsourced, pay for service, and available in all of the models, public, private, or hybrid. You could also have platform as a service, and that's where you get the infrastructure and the software framework, but then the businesses can run their own applications if they're in the development of their own applications. And a lot of times the web applications are used to connect to the platforms, which makes the service flexible and they're robust enough to support them. And though platform as a service is also scalable and ideal for business environments that have multiple developers working on like a single project. And then there's software as a service, or SaaS. And this particular solution includes the deployment of software over the internet to various businesses who pay via subscription or on a pay per use model. So think Adobe, right? Adobe software. If you use Adobe, you have access to, you pay a subscription every month, but then it gives you access to all of their tools available online. You can download them on a computer, but you can only be logged into maybe 2 at a time. So that's software as a service.
Well,
and the good thing with software as a service is that the businesses doesn't have to worry about the updates and all that, because Adobe will take care of that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would love for us to carry on and talk about this, because this I think is going to become, even as we move into 2022, become more valuable conversation. But I've got one more question as we wrap this up, because I wanted to allow an opportunity if there were questions available beyond here. But I'll ask maybe one or two more. But, you know, as a wrap up, I guess, just are there your top 4 best practices for housing providers? What are they? And, you know, what should they be implementing to protect their data on that note? Like, give me your top 4 best practices for protecting your data.
So I don't recommend tools because they come and go, right? I don't, and no one pays me to do that. But again, I think when you are considering the protection of your data, you need to plan your infrastructure. You need to make sure that it's documented. You need to make sure that you are practicing recovery in the event that something will happen. And you need to be proactive about it, right? So you need to think of securing your data first, not as an afterthought.
Okay. All right. So I would assume that for most people, it's just, you know, going through those processes and then training your staff or your employees and everyone involved in that process of how the whole security protocol should work for them within their own individual organizations. As you stated, you know, it just depends upon your size, whether you're a 5-man operation or a 500-man operation. No disrespect to women, a 500-person operation. So I think that was an excellent summation of what people should be doing as far as practices. I want to ask, Mary, do we have any questions?
I have not seen any come through yet.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, I guess I would go with my last question. When you talk about housing security, should housing providers be testing these protections, and how often would you recommend, as a professional in the world of cybersecurity, for someone to be testing the accuracy and the strength of their particular system?
So, you know, I would say minimally every 6 months. The real challenge that we have is that there's so many data breaches, malicious software, lots of ways that people are becoming attacked, that you have to be careful with the data that you're collecting that's in your system, that your users are creating, but also that it's just coming into your network in a way that is unintentional, right? You know, users don't mean to click. They see something interesting and they click, and they don't know necessarily that it's phishing, but that comes with the training. So as things are developed and updates for your software and your hardware is provided, you need to make sure that you are applying those patches. And I don't mean blindly when you're doing this as a business. You need to really look to see what it says that it is addressing and make sure that you understand what it's addressing. And if it indicates, well, it hasn't been tested with different things. So a lot of time as users at home with operating systems, it says I have an update, and you just click update and you let it go and you don't read it, right? Then when you come back into it, some application that you've been using hasn't been tested to work well with the operating system that you just upgraded to. But had you really read what it was going to do, you might have said, well, let me wait, right? So I never go to the first version of any operating system. I always wait for the next patch to come out, or 2 or 3, before I upgrade to the next operating system. Because a lot of times those first versions, while they will look at integrating well with certain software, you know, if you have on your company systems or things that you create in proprietary software, and you haven't tested in an environment, then you shouldn't, you know, upgrade, because then that could inadvertently take your business down as well. So I believe that if your companies can sustain it, that you do have a test network that is completely identical to your production network, where you will introduce those things first and see how it works before you push it out to your large infrastructure. And it doesn't, I mean, it just has to be 2 or 3 systems. And it can even be virtual replication of your production service. But you want to have some indication that before I push out a huge upgrade or patching or whatever, that I know that my users are still going to be able to do what they need to do, and that any data that I am maintaining on my service is still going to be available and protected. And so you practice those things. You know, we call it in a bubble or in a closed environment to make sure that it's not going to adversely impede your progress on your network.
Well, I think that kind of carries us to our time frame that we had allotted. And I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to assist us and kind of enlighten us here on some of the trends and some of the things that, you know, do plague small to medium-sized operations, such as affordable and public housing operators when it comes to cyber security and IT and networking. And I guess I would say that I've heard this term before, and you can speak on it if you can do it in 60 seconds or less. Some of my accounts that I've spoken with, they use this term that my IT guy has got it. And I hear that a lot. What is your take on my IT guy has got it?
That means he has some knowledge of what's going to happen. The question is, he might have it, got it, but does he know what to do with it? He's got it, right? Well,
yeah, I guess that kind of indicates, you know, that he should know what he's doing, but you know, we want to make sure that all folks that are working with networks actually have all of the knowledge and the expertise that they should, and not fall prone to the thought process that they are not equally as educated, innovative, and experienced hackers or people that can create some challenges for them that are out there. Well, I guess we probably should never believe that we're the only ones or we're the best at what we do.
No, and again, I can't stress this enough. Documentation is key. If you write it down, then you'll know what it is that you're supposed to do. If you don't write it down, then you don't know what you will do. And so then that could lead to additional challenges. But create your documentation, your standard operating procedures, and follow it. And if it doesn't work, then you revise it. And then that's why you practice to make sure that your SOP is up to date and will work when needed.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yes, thank you both so much. That was very informative. And thank you everyone for joining us. Our last session of the day is going to start at 2:40 Eastern Time.